They tried to cage his spirit, but they forgot that an iron heart can never be truly contained. Witness the epic journey of those who broke their chains and fought for the freedom they deserved. Click subscribe now and witness the power of a heart made of steel. The night my husband told his family I had cheated on him, his mother didn't even look at me when she said it. "You need to leave this house." That was it. No question. No chance to speak. Just 7 words, and a door she held open like she was doing me a favor. I was standing in the kitchen of the house my husband and I had shared for 4 years, holding a dish towel I'd been using to dry the dinner plates, and I remember thinking I haven't even finished the dishes yet. As if that mattered. As if anything in that moment made any logical sense at all. My husband, I'll call him my ex-husband now, because that's what he became, stood behind his mother with his arms crossed and said nothing. He had said everything he needed to say to her before I got home from work that evening. I found out later exactly what he told her. But standing there in that kitchen, all I knew was that the man I had built my entire adult life around was watching me get thrown out of my own home, and he was doing it on purpose. My name is Claire. I was 31 years old. I taught 2nd grade at an elementary school in a town small enough that everybody already knew each other's business by 9 in the morning. And in a town like that, being publicly accused of cheating on your husband doesn't just cost you your marriage. It costs you everything. I had met my ex-husband, I'll call him Derek, when I was 25. He was charming in the way that certain men are charming when they want something from you. Attentive, present. The kind of person who remembered the name of your childhood dog and brought you coffee exactly the way you liked it. I mistook all of that attention for love, which I think is a very easy mistake to make when you are young and you want very badly to be chosen. We got married when I was 27. By the time I was 30, I had started to notice things. Small things at first. He came home late with explanations that didn't quite add up. He angled his phone screen away from me when he got texts. He started having long phone calls in the garage with the door closed. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself that I was the kind of person who looked for problems even when there weren't any. I told myself a lot of things for about a year before I finally asked him directly. He turned it around on me so fast it made my head spin. Suddenly, I was the suspicious one. I was the controlling one. I was the one who clearly had something to hide if I was this obsessed with what he was doing. And somewhere, in the middle of all of that, I stopped trusting my own instincts entirely. That's what I regret most, even now. Not the marriage, not the divorce. Just those 12 months I spent talking myself out of knowing what I already knew. The evening everything collapsed. I had stayed late at school for a parent-teacher conference. I came home to a house that felt different the second I walked in, too quiet, too still, the way a room feels after people have been talking about you. His mother was sitting at my kitchen table. His sister was on the couch. Derek was standing near the window with the particular posture of a man who has already decided how a conversation is going to go. He told them I had been sleeping with a colleague. He said he had proof. He said it had been going on for months. His mother's face did something I had never seen a face do before. It went completely flat, like a screen going dark. And then she stood up and told me I needed to leave. I said his name. I said, "Derek, tell them the truth." He looked at the floor. His sister said, "Just go, Claire. Have some self-respect." I left with my car keys, my purse, and the clothes I was wearing. It was a Wednesday in October, and it was 43 degrees outside, and I sat in my car in the driveway for 4 minutes before I realized I had nowhere to go. My parents had both passed by the time I was 28, my mother from cancer, my father 18 months later from what the doctors called heart failure and what I called grief. I had a few good friends in town, but this was the kind of accusation that travels fast, and I already knew that by morning, the story Derek was telling would be the only version most people heard. In a small town, the first story wins. There was one person I knew would answer the phone. My older sister lived 40 minutes away, in a city that felt like a different world from the one I'd grown up in. She was 35, worked in accounting, had a no-nonsense apartment with a pull-out sofa and a cat named Gerald, who distrusted everyone equally. We had been close our whole lives in the particular way that sisters can be close, meaning we had fought terribly and loved each other anyway, and by our 30s we had gotten very good at skipping the fighting and going straight to the love. I called her from the driveway. She picked up on the second ring. I said, "I don't have anywhere to go tonight." She said, "Then drive to me. I'll put the coffee on." I want you to understand what it means to have a person like that in your life. Not someone who asks 100 questions before they help you. Not someone who needs the whole story, the full context, the ironclad proof of your innocence before they decide you deserve a couch to sleep on. Just someone who says, "Come here. I'll put the coffee on." I drove to her apartment that night with no plan, no extra clothes, and a story I barely understood myself. She handed me a mug and sat down across from me and listened to the whole thing from the beginning without interrupting once. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He's lying." I said, "I know." She said, "Then we're going to prove it." That was easier said than done. Derek's so-called proof was a series of text messages he claimed to have found on my phone, messages between me and a male colleague. I'll call Marcus, who taught 5th grade down the hall from my classroom. The texts, as Derek described them to anyone who would listen, were explicit and ongoing. He showed them to his family. He showed them to 2 of our mutual friends. Word spread the way. Word spreads in small towns fast and wide, and without any of the nuance that the truth requires. The problem was that I had never sent those messages. Marcus was a colleague, and nothing more. We ate lunch together sometimes. We complained about standardized testing and bad coffee and parents who emailed at 11 at night. We were friendly in the ordinary way that coworkers are friendly. There was nothing else. When I told my sister this, she believed me immediately. When I told the few friends I managed to reach in those first terrible days, I could hear them trying to believe me. There's a particular quality to the silence on the other end of a phone call when someone is deciding whether you're telling the truth. I became very familiar with that silence that October. My sister let me sleep on her pull-out sofa. She let me close until I could go back to the house for my things, which she came with me to do, standing in the doorway with her arms crossed while I packed 2 suitcases as fast as I could. She drove me to work on the mornings my hands were shaking too badly to feel safe behind the wheel. She sat with me through the initial meeting with the divorce attorney and asked better questions than I did because I kept losing track of what was being said. She converted her home office into a bedroom for me. She pushed her desk into the corner, bought a real bed frame from a second-hand shop, hung curtains over the window that faced the street. She did all of this on a Tuesday evening while I was at work, and when I came home and saw it, I stood in the doorway and couldn't speak. She said, "You needed a door that closes. Everyone needs a door that closes." I lived in that room for 11 months. Here is what those 11 months looked like from the inside. I drove 40 minutes each way to work every day because I couldn't afford to transfer schools mid-year, and because I refused to let Derek's lie take my job from me too. I filed for divorce. I retained an attorney who told me, with the careful language of someone who had seen many situations like mine, that false accusations in divorce proceedings were not uncommon, and were also not easy to disprove without concrete evidence. I cried in my sister's car more times than I can count. I did not cry at school, because my second graders needed me to be steady, and being steady for them was the thing that kept me steady for myself. I also started paying attention to everything. Derek and I had a neighbor, a retired man, I'll call Mr. Patterson, who had lived next door for over a decade and who, in the specific way of certain retired people with time on their hands, had installed a security camera system on his property that covered not only his own driveway, but a significant portion of the street. He had shown it to Derek once, proudly, as a demonstration of the technology. I had been standing right there. I remembered this 3 months after I moved out. I don't know what triggered the memory. I think I was driving to work, and something about the angle of the morning light made me think of that particular afternoon. Derek nodding politely, while Mr. Patterson explained the camera's field of view. I pulled over and called my attorney from the side of the road. The camera, it turned out, had a direct line of sight to our front door, and to a portion of the driveway where Derek sometimes sat in his car to make phone calls. My attorney filed a request. Mr. Patterson, who had always been kind to me, and who had, I later learned, found the whole situation troubling, cooperated fully. The footage covered a 6-month period. What it showed was this. Derek, sitting in his car in the driveway on at least a dozen separate occasions, on the phone, for conversations that lasted between 15 and 40 minutes. This alone proved nothing, but the timestamps mattered. Several of those calls happened on the same dates and at the same times as the text messages he claimed to have found on my phone. The messages he said proved I had been having an affair. If I was supposedly texting Marcus in those windows, and Derek was the one on the phone during those same windows, a very specific question arose. Our phone records told the rest of the story. The texts had been sent from my number, but the metadata, the technical information embedded in the messages themselves, showed something that a forensic phone analyst, brought in by my attorney, explained to me in terms I had to ask her to repeat twice, before I understood. The messages had been composed and sent using a third-party application that could spoof a sender's number. This application had been when one wanted to a device. That device had used our home wireless network. The network logs still existed. Derek had fabricated the evidence. He had sat in our driveway, on the phone with someone who apparently helped him do this. The calls went to a prepaid number that was never fully traced, and he had manufactured proof of an affair that never happened so that he could file for divorce on fault grounds. In our state, fault grounds affect asset division. We had a house, 2 cars, and a joint investment account that had grown considerably over 4 years. Derek had done the math. I remember the afternoon my attorney called me with the forensic results. I was sitting in my sister's kitchen eating a bowl of cereal for dinner because it was 8:30 and I had been too tired to cook anything real. My sister was on the couch grading invoices. Gerald the cat was sitting on the windowsill looking at the dark. My attorney said, "Claire, we have what we need." I set down my spoon. My sister looked up. I mouthed the words to her. "We got him." She put her hand over her mouth. What followed was several months of legal proceedings that I will not walk through in complete detail, because the honest truth is that much of it is a blur of paperwork and waiting rooms, and the particular low-level dread of knowing something is being resolved, but not being able to see the end of it yet. What I will tell you is the outcome. Derek did not get the asset split he had engineered the lie to obtain. The fault-finding went against him. He retained an attorney who attempted to argue that the forensic analysis was inconclusive, and that attorney was very politely and very thoroughly dismantled by mine. The house was sold. The proceeds were divided in a way that reflected what had actually happened. Derek also faced a separate civil matter related to the false accusations and the demonstrable harm to my professional reputation, which had been real and significant. 3 families had pulled their children from my class mid-year, and my school had placed me on administrative review, pending the outcome of the divorce proceedings. That review concluded in my favor. The 3 families were notified of what had actually occurred. 2 of them reached out to me directly to apologize. The 3rd did not, which I have made my peace with. Derek lost considerably more than he would have lost in an ordinary divorce. I want to tell you about the morning his family found out the truth, because that morning mattered to me in a way I didn't fully expect. His mother called me. This was something I never anticipated. I had her number blocked, but she called from a different phone, and I picked up without thinking. She said my name in a voice I didn't recognize. The flatness was gone. What had replaced it was something I can only describe as the sound of a person encountering the full weight of what they've done. She said, "I owe you an apology." I said, "Yes." She said, "I'm so sorry, Claire. I didn't." I let her finish. I didn't make it easier for her, but I let her finish. And then I said, "I know you believed him. I also know that you chose to believe him, without asking me a single question. I would like you to think about that for the rest of your life." And I hung up. I don't feel guilty about that. I have examined the question, and I don't. Derek's sister sent a long text that I read once, and then deleted. Derek himself never contacted me. I think that's probably for the best. Here is what I want to tell you about my sister. In the 11 months I lived in her converted office, She never once made me feel like a burden. She never sighed when I cried. She never suggested, even gently, that I was taking too long to get back on my feet. She bought the good coffee because she said I deserved it. She watched terrible reality television with me on Friday nights and pretended she wasn't enjoying it. She told me more than once that the best thing that would ever come out of this was me finally being free of a man who had never deserved me in the first place. When the settlement came through, the first thing I did was pay her back for 11 months of groceries and the bed frame and the curtains, which she tried to refuse, and which I deposited into her account before she could stop me. The second thing I did was take her to dinner at the nicest restaurant in the city and let her order whatever she wanted. The third thing I did was put a down payment on a 2-bedroom apartment. 2 bedrooms. When I showed her the listing, she looked at me and said, "Claire, I'm not moving in with you. I have Gerald." I said, "Gerald is invited. The 2nd bedroom is yours. You gave me a room when I had nothing. I want you to have one that's yours, in my home, for as long as you want it. A real one. Not a pull-out sofa." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Gerald does hate my current neighbors." She took the room. I want to be honest about something. I am not entirely healed. I don't think healing works the way we sometimes describe it, like a straight line with a clear endpoint where you arrive, dust yourself off, and never hurt again. What I have instead is a life that feels genuinely like mine, in a way my life never quite felt during those 4 years with Derek. I teach my 2nd graders. I drink good coffee. I have a sister who lives down the hall and a cat who has, over time, grudgingly decided that I am acceptable. Some mornings I wake up and the first thought I have is clean. No dread, no weight, just the ordinary quiet of a day beginning. Those mornings took a long time to come, but they came. What I know now that I did not know when I was standing in that kitchen holding a dish towel is this. The people who believe the worst about you without asking you a single question, they were never really in your corner. Not because they're evil, just because their loyalty was always conditional on you being convenient. And you cannot build a life on conditional love. You can build one on the unconditional kind. My sister taught me that. She taught me that by answering the phone on a Wednesday night in October and saying, "Come here, I'll put the coffee on." That's the whole story. A woman was lied about and thrown out. Her sister opened a door. The truth came out eventually, the way it usually does, because lies require maintenance and the truth just sits there waiting. The man who built a careful architecture of deception to avoid losing money lost considerably more in the end. The woman who lost everything on a Wednesday night now has a life that fits her. And somewhere in a city apartment, a cat named Gerald is sitting on a windowsill, looking skeptically at the world, perfectly content. Which, honestly, is the ending I would have chosen.